Good morning. Start all over again. My name is Sam Taggart. I'm a retired family physician. I didn't say retired. I'm a retired family physician. And I was in this residency program the second year of its inception in 1972. And our clinic was right over there, I think. It had been an old allergist's office. And that building may still be there. Anyway, that was a long time ago. That was 51. It was 51 years ago.
Wow.
And I want to encourage any residents who are out there listening and any residents in the room, if you do something in your residency program and it is meaningful to you, write it down and save it, okay? Because 50 years from now, you may be researching a book on family medicine in Arkansas and find it, okay? When I was researching for Every Family a Family Doctor, which came out this last spring, I found a petition that I had signed. There were 12 of us who signed it, first year and second year residents, in support of Dr. John Tudor, who was the first chairman of this department. Anyway, I was very pleased to find that. Today, we're going to talk about the history of the modern family movement, specifically in Arkansas. But what I'm really here to do is to put your lives and my life into context. That's kind of what history is all about. That's what sociology is all about. That's what anthropology is. How do we put our lives and our activities and the things that we do into context? Okay. So they have some meaning, so they have a much deeper meaning, a much better meaning for us. And to do that, we have to ask 4 questions. By the way, my son is an anthropologist, and he said, Sam, he says, Dad, you always want to ask 4 questions when you're talking about history. You want to know, who are these people? Who are these people? What kind of problems did they face? What kind of tools did they have? And how did they respond? We do not have a time to go into all of how did they respond and or the tools today, but we're going to talk about who these people were, how the modern family medicine movement began, because the modern family medicine movement really started about the year I was born. I was born in 46, but it started in 1947, 48, right after the Second World War. Okay. I got the right one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay, good. If you look at the history of medicine, for the most part, for almost all of our entirety of our existence as a race, okay, is the history of the generalists. Okay, up until about 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, every human being or their family, and for the most part, life existed in small family groups. Every group was an encyclopedia of survival. Okay, and it really wasn't until about 10 to 12,000 years ago, and the advent of agriculture and the Neolithic Revolution, y'all know all about all that, agricultural revolution, that people started to settle down, and population began to dramatically increase. Okay, one of the nice things that I've had over the last few years is the opportunity to look at the world's literature on family doctors and country doctors. And it's been a very nice survey, okay? And what I have found is that almost all writers, at least in the languages that have been either written in English or translated into English, treat the family doctor and the country doctor very nicely. because there are several traits that go across cultures, across all kinds of histories. And that is one of those is that people trust their doctor. They trust the doctor they trust their family doctor and the country doctor to do the right thing. And as importantly as that, they trust the doctor to be there when they're needed. Okay? Most country doctors in small towns, particularly in rural states, and by the way, I'm using these words, I'm saying them both, but I'm going to just quit and start using family doctor. Because I'm going to use them, even though family doctor and country doctor are not necessarily always the same thing, they really are very close. In most situations, the family doctor, the country doctor, is maybe the best educated person in the community. And I don't say that as a conceit, it's just true, okay? And most people think of their doctor not only as well-informed, but as wise. You have two half breaths in life. I don't know if y'all thought about this very much, but you have one that when you come out of the womb, that's this gasping half breath where you expand your lungs. And then the second half breath you have in life is at the very end. And the second one is more of a sigh. The family doctor has a tendency, has the opportunity to be there for both of those half breaths. And that's where the trust comes in, because you're always there. And for those of you who are either listening or are in the room today who are going to be family doctors, that's a great thing to have at your disposal. And it's a lot of fun. Despite what by the way, I have on my school teacher voice today. I'm speaking clear and enunciating, standing tall. But as a family doctor, generally, one of the characteristics of family doctors is that they have a quiet voice that's consistent with the exam room or with the patient encounter. They have a warm smile and they have a soft touch. How many times have you walked into your family doctor's office and sat down in a chair? And by the way, almost never, when you go into a family doctor's office, will there be a computer between you and them? Will there be a desk between you and them? If you think about how most of those encounters are set up, the doctor is here and here. And it also gives the doctor the opportunity to reach out and touch. It's a very important thing. And I know in this day of malpractice and not wanting to hurt people and other stuff, that's still a very, very important element. And it's an important element of what goes on in a family doctor's office. If the guy who wrote Our Town had the opportunity to write his story again, I think he might make the narrator of that story a country doctor, because very often that's what the country doctor is. He's the narrator in the small, and this is particularly true in small towns, more so than in large towns. But even, I lived in the town of Benton. And Benton, when I moved there, was 6,000 or 7,000, 8,000 people, and it's now 30,000 people, and it's no longer a little town. But we were still the narrator, and you're also the father confessor. So this is what you're putting yourself in for. Also, I would suspect that any physicians listening to this or here in this room have had a patient walk into your office with a piece of paper in their hand and say, "Doctor, I found this on the internet at 2 o'clock in the morning. Do you think this is right for me?" Okay. And it may be something you've never heard, but your job is, as a priest of technology, is to say, "I don't know, that may not be what you need to do." Okay. When you start looking at where doctors came from, okay, doctors don't like to hear this, but doctors and priests came from the same place. Okay, the shaman, 8 to 10,000 years ago, the first burial, the first remains that we have, or the oldest remains that we have, are a 12,000 year 12-year-old female shaman from the Levant. That's where all the fighting is going on right now, okay? And it was a female. And she was probably one of the first obvious doctor. And when people talk about shaman, shaman actually comes from Siberia, but the term shaman was used to describe this lady, okay? Now, when you get down, when you start pulling it down to our time, to Arkansas, the place we call Arkansas, who were the first, where was the first doctor in Arkansas? Where was the first family doctor? Well, we probably have it pinpointed pretty good, okay? It was probably on a high sandy bank above the Cache River, a little bit to the west of Jonesboro, and a little bit to the east of Walnut Ridge, at a place called the Sloan site, okay? The Sloan site is, they found the first, one of the first organized burial sites in the Western Hemisphere at that place. And it's dated to about 8,500 BCE, or about 10,500 years ago. If people were thinking carefully enough to systematically bury their dead, they were also thinking about health and disease and how do you stay alive, okay? And that's pretty well been worldwide, okay? And by the way, that first family doctor was probably a woman and not a guy, okay? All right, you know why? It makes good sense. Who takes care of the children? Who takes care of the wounded? Who takes care of the old? Okay, it's the females. And so the women, the first doctors, just like the shaman I showed you a minute or so ago, the first doctor in Arkansas, first family doctor was probably a female. Okay, well, in 1803, y'all know this. I'm going to go over a little bit of it. We bought the place we would call Arkansas from the French, who had stolen it from the Spanish, who had stolen it from the French, who stole it from the American Indians. Okay, and when that land was purchased, when this place was purchased, there probably were no more than 4,000 or 5,000 people in this place. Right now, there had been upwards of 250 to 300,000 people at the time that the first Spanish conquistadors came through here 3 or 4 centuries before. But the Columbian Exchange had killed off most of those people. And what you had was a smattering of Indian tribes, Quapaw, few Cherokee, some Osage and up in the mountains. And then there were 360, one of the ladies at the Arkansas Archaeological Survey has estimated, and early, that there were 365 hunter-trappers and about 65 slaves, and about 3,000 to 4,000 Native Americans, okay? There weren't any doctors, obviously. Who were the first doctors in that time frame? They were domestic medicine people. They were granny doctors. Granny doctors were very common. And granny doctors still exist in this state. Mary Jo Tatum from north of Batesville just died a few years ago. And she was a granny doctor. There were three types of common types of the domestic family doctors, okay? Ella Dunn is a great example of this. And Ella Dunn lived up until the 70s, I believe, but she was an herbal doctor. These people collected everything in their environment, learned how to use it. They passed knowledge down from one generation to the next, much like the medical profession did, okay? The second type was Dizzy Branscombe. Dizzy Branscombe is from up in North Arkansas. She was actually lived for a time in Tawney County, Missouri, just on the Arkansas-Missouri border. She had 15 babies and decided she'd be a midwife. Well, somebody said, well, Ms. Branscombe, what qualifies you to be a midwife? She said, well, hell, I had 15 children, okay? And so Dizzy Branscombe became the midwife for that part of the interior of the Ouachitas, of the Ozarks, I'm sorry, okay? A third form of granny doctor that was very common and was primarily in the African American community, but not exclusively in there, were hoodoo doctors. Caroline Dye was from Newport, Arkansas. And that's this lady right here. Caroline Dye was a hoodoo doctor, and there were lots of things. There were lots of voodoo medicine. A lot of things went on with her, but she was so successful in what she did. Okay, at the turn of the 20th century, the city of Newport, she lived in Newport. The city of Newport had a trolley system. They had to put an extra trolley stop to get to her house because there were so many people going out to her house. On many of these domestic medicine folks and these granny doctors, they may well have passed the name down from one generation to the next. Caroline Dye theoretically lived from about 1814 to 1933. She probably didn't. Okay, her eldest daughter probably took the name Caroline Dye when she gave up the business and started doing this. And passed away. When the people started moving in, and from 1804 through the beginning of the Civil War, about every decade the population doubled. Okay, and when people came in, what they would do is they would set up near a place where they could have potable water, good clean water, and that was usually coming out of the mountains. They got out of the Mississippi Delta and the White River Delta because of all the mosquitoes and the malaria. And they got up in the mountains. Okay. They got up in the hills away from the mosquitoes and they got clean water. Okay. And when they would set up a town at a river crossing. Okay. Davidson, Searcy, Little Rock, Conway, Malvern, Arkadelphia, all these places are on rivers. They would start there, they would open up, and then when two or more gathered, a doctor would show up. Okay. Now these guys were not real well qualified. Okay. Most of them had preceptored with another doctor somewhere else, and he had waited till they had worked with him for a little while, and he'd say, okay, you can put out a shingle now, but go somewhere else. Okay. And these guys were 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, men. They were all men. I have one record of one woman, but for the most part, they were all kids. They were all young men, and they all had whiskers. They all grew beards, okay, so they could look older. And that was part of why they all grew beards, is so they could look older. The quote you see there on the screen. By the way, there's two really nice books that are over here in the Historical Research Center on the 5th floor of the library. One is called Odd Leaves of a Louisiana Swamp Doctor, and the other is Adventures of an Arkansas Doctor. And both of these are about Arkansas. Both of these are about Arkansas, about these young men. But one of the just south here down in Rison, Arkansas, just east of Fordyce, is the town of Rison in Cleveland County, and that was a center where people started to form, and they started to get doctors in the early 19th century. And I found this quote by Henry David Sadler, talking of one of his cousins, Calvin Stanfield. These doctors were part and parcel with those who cleared the woods, built homes, schools, and churches, and laid the foundations of our society. Okay, and all their medicine took place in the home. And all of it took place in the home, and if they had an office, it was an afterthought usually. Okay, we have a couple of things that tell us what these people saw. If you walk about 300 yards over there, go over to the UMS library, and go up on the 5th floor and talk to Tim Nutt or Suzanne, or one of those folks up there, and say, I would like to see Medical Notes and Reflections by Dr. A.W. Webb. A.W. Webb practiced in Chico County from about 1830 to about 1850, okay? And then he moved to Little Rock. But he wrote this book in longhand, okay? And it's legible. Believe it or not, it is legible. And it's really, really interesting. And you can go in there and read this book, and what you'll see, okay, is that many of the things he saw were the exact same things that you and I see in our office today. A few things he didn't see a lot of: cancer, heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. You know why? First of all, he couldn't diagnose diabetes. Okay. But the reason is people didn't live long enough. People were dying in their 30s and 40s of the fevers. I do another talk where I talk about the violent diseases of the 19th century. And there were some violent, horrible diseases that hit these, but mainly the fevers, the typhoid fevers, and 3 or 4 different forms of malaria. But he talks a lot about that. He talks a lot about cholera. He talks a little bit about yellow fever, because yellow fever really started hitting Arkansas after his time. There were some wonderful, wonderful characters, and I don't have a lot of time to go on. Notice the beards on these 2 guys off to the right, off to the side. They look a little bit dreadful. James DeBrol is a really interesting man because he was a family doctor. He fathered a large part. He helped advance medical education in Arkansas dramatically because of his children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren. There's been a DeBrol in practice of medicine for a long time in Arkansas, and he's from Fort Smith and Van Buren. Dr. Charles McDermott, okay, was an irascible old man, okay, who didn't like people very much. He didn't abide by the rule of a quiet voice, a warm smile, and a soft touch. Okay, he was an angry old man. Okay, but he stayed in Dermot. He stayed in Bend, Arkansas, on Bayou Bartholomew. Okay, you don't know where Bayou Bartholomew is? It's in extreme South Arkansas. And when he died, they changed the name of the town from Bend, Arkansas to Dermot, Arkansas. So the town he lived in was named after his, Dermot. Nathan Smith, the guy here, was also he's also an irascible old man, okay? But he had he was called the weatherman. And for 30 years, this old man collected the temperature, the wind speed, the humidity, and he kept wonderful obsessive compulsive records. When the Smithsonian Institute decided to set up their weather bureau, okay, they used much of his work to do that. Okay? He was a very interesting man. Matthew Cunningham, the little fellow down here was probably one of the most well-educated of the early Arkansas doctors. He went on to be the mayor of Little Rock, but he's a fascinating man, and there's been quite a few things written about him. I left Lorenzo Gibson last for a reason, okay? I'm always looking for who has been here the longest. I mean, I love this continuity idea. Lorenzo Gibson came to Arkansas in the practice of medicine in 1833. His great-grandson, I'll put enough greats in there, just retired as an OBGYN in Benton, Frank Tebow. And there's been somebody continuously practicing medicine in that family, okay, since that time, okay? All right. The DeBrols are very similar. There's a DeBrol who practiced a young DeBrol who practiced in Mountain View for a number of years, and he's moved to Paris. He's near Paris Island, Arkansas, Paris Island, Tennessee. So we can't count him anymore. Another family that is really important that you might run into in your studies and you're looking at things. I'm having a mental block on the name. From Harrison, Arkansas. I'll come back to it. Wonderful family. Leonidas Kirby. That's what the man's name is. Okay. And he has fathered all kinds of physicians. The most recent addition is a young lady who works as an internist at Mayo Clinic. And I got to talk to her when I was doing research for one of my books. Prior to the Civil War, as y'all I'm sure already know, nobody believed nobody in medicine believed in the germ theory. There were people out there who believed it, but there wasn't anybody in medicine. It wasn't a part of the accepted thing. Okay. But the Civil War changed a lot about medicine. There were no African-American doctors. The earliest African-American healer, and I don't know what to call this lady, was a lady named Patricia Trotter from Ashley County in Hamburg, Arkansas. And the doctors of Ashley County, she was a family doctor, but she was a mixture of a midwife. She was an herbalist. She was everything to her community. And the doctors of the community, the doctors who were accepted and had a license, sent a letter in the late 1870s, early 1880s, asking the new medical people to accept her as a doctor because she did better work than they did. Those were their words. Patricia Trotter was her name, and she was probably the very first. After the Civil War, there were 7 medical schools devoted to African Americans because there weren't any African American doctors. There were a few, but not very many, but there were 7. And very quickly, Arkansas began to develop an African American presence in family medicine, especially around Helena, Marianna, Hughes, and West Memphis, and one of the real interesting places was in Jackson County, Arkansas, in Newport. Okay, Newport had a strong presence of African American doctors, and they were very well respected. Napoleon Hauser, you see that, was a pharmacist, physician, and he was one of the leaders of that movement during that time period. There were no women in medicine. Most of you women in the audience know that Elizabeth Blackwell was probably the first female physician in the United States to actually go to medical school and become a physician. But there may have been a few slightly before her, but there weren't any that were accepted. But in Arkansas, the two first women who were both family doctors, okay, one was here in Little Rock, okay, and that was Ida Jo Brooks, and she was a dynamite lady, okay, she was really neat, and Dr. Pearl Tatum, I'm saying it wrong, Dr. Pearl Tatum from Eureka Springs, okay, and they came just about the same time. They were within a year or two of each other, so to try to say which one came first, I don't know. The interesting thing about Ida Jo Brooks, before she went to medical school, she started the Arkansas Teachers Association. She went to college, and then she applied to the brand new medical school in 1890, 1888, somewhere along there. They turned her down because she was a woman, so she went to Boston. She came back. She became the first female staff member at the new insane asylum. She became the first female member of the faculty at the University of Arkansas. Okay. When World War I started, she applied to go in the Army as a doctor. They turned her down, so she ended up developing programs for underprivileged children in Arkansas. She had a bevy of nurses around. She was also present at the beginnings of the initial professional nurses organization in 1912. So really important lady. She really did. Okay, y'all have heard. But do they still teach about Abraham Schweitzer in medical school? Huh? Okay, yeah. I see a couple of nods yes, a couple of nods no. Well, there were a lot of quacks. Okay, there were a lot of quacks in medicine in the teens and in the first two decades of the United States, or first of the 20th century. And the Carnegie Foundation put together the program. They hired Abraham Schweitzer to go in and evaluate all of the medical schools. There were 2 medical schools in Arkansas. He came to Arkansas. He stayed about a half a day, didn't stay much longer than that. And he said, there's no socially redeeming quality to either school. Okay, and left. Okay, Well, they cut down the number of medical schools in the United States with his survey from about 150 down to about 31 or 32. The two in Arkansas, that was about 1910,
Okay,
about 1910.
so right before the flu epidemic.
Oh, yeah, 8 to 10 years before the epidemic. But thanks to a guy named Morgan Smith, who was just an excellent, and if you're ever reading anything about the history of either public health, nursing in Arkansas, or medicine in Arkansas, he was the dean of the medical school. He was behind everything positive that was going on in that day. Thanks to Morgan Smith, they combined most medical schools and came up with one decent medical school. Wasn't a great medical school, but it was a decent medical school, and it passed everybody's standard. Okay. Now, there was a problem with the Flexner report that we don't talk a lot about in medicine. It eliminated all but 2 of the African-American schools that were training African-American doctors to practice medicine in the United States. It eliminated almost every medical school that accepted women. In 1900, there were 7,000 female doctors practicing in the United States. In 1950, that number had dwindled to about 4,000 because they were not being trained. Now, one thing Arkansas can say at that particular frame is they were taking females. They weren't taking many. They were taking a real small number. They were taking a few. Okay. So the Flexner report had a negative flip side that was really difficult for both physicians of color and for women. Okay. Now, the other thing, and we're going to talk a little bit here about technology. I don't want to talk very much about it, but with the advent of the germ theory in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and you know, all new theories have to be founded, validated, disseminated, and incorporated. It took until the 1920s before the germ theory was fully incorporated in Arkansas. There are stories of doctors talking to Frances Sage Bradley, who's a wonderful person. Okay. Tell her, saying, now, Dr. Bradley, I wash my hands after every delivery. After every delivery, not before the delivery. But there were people in academia, not in Arkansas, but there were people in academia who understood that technology could not simply take over medicine. Okay. And this guy right here, I put this in here because I think that's a wonderful quote. And I think that quote right there, the treatment of disease must always be completely impersonal. But the treatment of the patient must be always completely personal. And that's where you and I excel. That's where we excel. Okay. For 25 to 30 years after the Flexner report, the technologies and the specialties began to dominate in a way that was very unhealthy. Okay. At that time, this, by the way, this really is an Arkansas picture. The United States was going through what is called a demographic transition. You know, I don't know how about y'all, but my mother and father's family had my mother and father's family had my mother had 8 brothers and sisters. My father had 10 brothers and sisters. Okay. Our generation, my mother and father's generation, birthed 2 to 3 children, and now we're down to 2, or a little bit less. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that's the main part of the demographic transition. But the main thing that does is that ends up means that you're shifting from an agricultural base. At the beginning of the 20th century, 98% of the people in Arkansas lived in the country, on the farm. Okay. By the 1950s, 1960s, that number was now about 46%, and it's now about 43%. Okay, and it stayed there. The other thing that happened was that people began to disappear out of the country. They began to disappear, not disappear, but they began to leave. There just wasn't anybody there, okay? So for several decades, the country lost a lot, and it's still losing a lot, okay? But that had a big impact on what was going to go and happen with family medicine in North Dakota. The AMA, and I'm not an AMA basher, so please don't, there may be some AMA bashers in the room, but I'm not an AMA basher. But Morris Fishbein, who was head of the AMA, was head of the JAMA, the head of JAMA, the editor of JAMA, was determined that the wave of medicine was going to be technology. That the generalist, and he almost was able to do this, with reducing the amount of time spent teaching generalists, family doctors, general practitioners, okay? And by the end of World War II, this is a study that was done by James Coddington at the University of Arkansas. The study was supported by the Arkansas Department of Health. And one of the things they found was that there had been a dramatic loss in physician population taking care of patients. And 2/3 of the physicians, it's not on here, yeah, it is on there. 2/3 of the physicians are serving 1/3 of the population. Almost all the doctors were in towns, or less and less and less and less. And there was a dramatic aging. They knew at that point that if you took somebody my age, okay, I was going to see about half, maybe 2/3 in a good day, of the patients that you would see, okay, and the older you get, the more common that is. So the guys who were out there were older. They were not. What did I do? I hit something. Sorry. I hit that.
Yeah, you fixed it.
It's fine.
That's fine. That's right. Okay. Okay. All right. I got me back.
You've been replaced.
I will. Absolutely. After the war, there was a group of people, and this is really pretty important for all of you, for those of you who are going to be family doctors in the room or in the audience. There was a hospital in Oakland, California called Merritt Hospital. And when the doctors came back from the war, the Merritt Hospital system created a series of 3 different kinds of doctors. They didn't say specialists. They said you were either an A, AA, or AAA. If you were an A, that was everybody who identified as a general practitioner. A AAA was everybody who identified as a specialist. And the A level doctors had to have a AAA sign off on everything they did.
And this was in California?
In California, in Oakland, California. Well, excuse my language, but this really pisses people off. And it really made them angry. The doctors got together and they said, this ain't gonna work. And it didn't work. This fellow right here, I think, can be credited as being probably the father of the modern family medicine movement in the United States. Okay, because he put together the General Practitioner Association of Oakland, California. That was in December of 1945, and by 1947, they had created the American Academy of General Practice. Okay, very close behind them, we had some just wonderfully, delightfully brilliant men in Arkansas. One of them was Clark Richardson from Fayetteville. The other was R.B. Robbins from Camden, and Dr. Clark. They're just wonderful, wonderful guys. And these guys, Arkansas was the 11th state to create an academy, a statewide academy of the National Academy. Okay. Now, there were three things they came up with. Okay, one was, why did they need to exist to begin with? Okay, why was this necessary? Number one, when you graduated from medical school, you didn't get any education after that. And the idea of continuing education, no, I can pick up a magazine, I can get all the continuing education I want. Continuing education was not a thing, okay? If you were going to get continuing education, you got it from your county medical society meeting. You might get it from the hospital. You might get it from your hospital staff meeting. Or if you were a member of the Southern Medical Association, you might get it there. You might get a little from the Arkansas Medical Society, but not very much. So these people knew that they needed to start finding a way to create programs to create continuing education for these guys who got out of medical school. They also needed to find a way to communicate with these family doctors. One of the things you'll always hear about country doctors is it's a very lonely place out there. And it can be a very lonely place out there. Okay. But if you have a way of communicating what's going on in the state, communicating what's going on nationally. And so Font Richardson, that guy I was telling you about, created a newsletter. By the way, the masthead of that newsletter read, for every family, a family doctor. Okay. That was the first time I've seen that phrase used in Arkansas. There was a wonderful convergence of events that happened at that same time. Sid McMath became a governor, our governor. He ran for governor based on better roads. There were 23 counties in the state of Arkansas in 1948 that did not have a paved road connecting it to any other county. Their way of communicating was on a train. The riding was on a train. Okay. He campaigned on better schools. Okay, we've got to have better schools. Okay. And he campaigned on a new medical center. This is building you see. It was over MacArthur Party at that time. So about this time, by the way, the deanship of the medical school had been a revolving door. With the exception of a couple of people like Vissenhausen, it had been a revolving door for about 20 years. And so very little got done. And there was open animosity between the private medical community and the medical school. But Sid McMath was resulted in Hayden Nicholson coming here. Hayden Nicholson was a breath of fresh air. Okay? He started preceptorships in where he went out to the newly formed academy and the medical society. He said, we need somebody to help us teach these students how to be family doctors. And he had a whole bunch of them. He had enough of them volunteer in that first year that every senior student could spend 6 weeks with a family doctor in the state of Arkansas somewhere. I'm going to be very proud of that. Okay. And he stayed around longer. They also began developing significant continuing education courses on a yearly, on a quarterly basis that were certifiable. By the way, anybody know how many hours you have to be stay certified in family practice? How many hours every 3 years? 150. Do you know that number's made up? It was completely made up. Oakland made up the number 100 hours. Okay. And then when they created the American Academy, they said, okay, we got to be more than Oakland. So that's where 150, that's where the idea of 150 hours every 3 years came from. So in case you thought it was something much more. Okay. These guys in the new academy, their idea was to increase new family doctors out in the state, to enhance continuing education and to create the newsletter. And they did a wonderful job of that. Okay. And there were some guys in that first batch of people who just did wonderful things. He kept the academy running when it would have folded. This fellow right here, Emil Schutte, all in the mid 1950s, in 1952 to 1956, all hospitals in Little Rock, Arkansas, were segregated. Okay. And there were no African American doctors or physicians of color on the staff. Amos Schutte got with several of the African-American doctors, and they lobbied everybody and got that reversed. And I'm very proud of him for that. I got to interview him before he died several years ago. A wonderful, wonderful man. It's hard to say, it's hard to overestimate the impact that Jim Weber had on the practice of medicine as a doctor. He's a family doctor from Jacksonville, and he was just a wonderful man who stayed busy, and he did things all the time for people.
Yeah, he, all of our residents used to rotate.
Yeah.
Including when I was a resident, used to rotate with him.
Yeah, he was just one. He and Tom Worthen.
He ended up being, the head of the academy in National Academy.
National Academy, he was-
For a while.
There's one or two guys who were the head. Okay. Between 1965 and 1980, there were some interesting things happened, okay, that were really very important. One was people started aging. People started getting, and we had a population of doctors who were getting older. Okay. They tried one family medicine residency. There was one family medicine residency that was started in the late 50s and went on for about 6 or 8 years. And then it faded because it was never given the support that it should have gotten. Okay. By the late 60s, Medicaid for Arkansas purposes, Medicaid really didn't start in 1970. Okay. It really started in 1965. And insurance started making care affordable to people. Okay? People could get care, people who didn't have to beg care. Okay? The Academy changed its name from the Academy of General Practice to the Academy of Family Physicians, and board certification started at about that time. And then the UNS Department of Family Medicine and AHEC program started. Okay. This program started in the very early 1970s, and then the AHEC program started in 1974. I'm not going to spend much time on these, but I would suggest to you, as a student, as a family physician, go back and read these studies. The Folsom Commission study and Folsom Revisited, that was done about 10 years ago, because it said every person needs a family doctor. Every person needs a personal physician. The Millis report for the establishment of primary care and as a center of patient care, and the Willard report. All of those studies came out within about 100 days in 1 year. Okay. And that prompted an awful lot of the changes that occurred in the early 70s and late 60s, early 70s. Another set of really lucky convergences happened. Dale Bumpers became governor. Dale Bumpers did an excellent job as the governor of Arkansas, both for underserved patients, for underprivileged children, but he hired and was a part of a team of people. He had Roger Bose. Roger Bose was his head of Health and Human Services. But Dean Shorey and James Dennis began putting together a school without walls for the AHEC program, okay, in 74. And that has grown, as y'all well know, has grown to be what it is, okay? And Tom Bruce, I've got his picture covered up over here, but Tom Bruce is one of my mentors. And he was one of those people who, if there was a problem, he jumped into it and got it fixed. He was one of the world's experts in rural health. By the way, one of the things he said, I remember him joking one time, he said, I can tell you how to get doctors in the small towns. And I said, how? He says, let me pick their wife. Okay, all right. And one of the things that they did, that was because they knew family doctors go where they're trained and where they're from. Okay. And that's why the AHEC programs, why they were created and why they have worked. Okay. The 1980s to 2000 saw a dramatic change of all kinds of things changing. But we originally talked about the newsletter continuing education and not being a family doctor. Well, these people, Les Anderson from Lono, who's still practicing and is excellent. For those of you in Jonesboro, Joe Stallings is one of my classmates and he's one of my heroes. Because he made the Jonesboro program into what it is. Mike Moody in the center was one of my residency mates in that when we were there. And he did more for the political aspects of medicine in Arkansas and the family doctor. Charles Rogers the same way. Okay. Linda McGee, you can't say enough good about her. Okay. You just can't say enough. She has never met a social need that she wouldn't attack. Whether it was AIDS or the Marshallese or whatever it happens to be. And I don't get the impression that she's slowing down, not one whit. Okay. I will tell this. She may be listening. When I interviewed her, I did one of my video interviews where I said, "How old are you?" She said, "I'm not going to tell you." The new age, the 1980s saw some things that were really different. Medicare, mushroom, okay? Insurance, mushroom, cost, mushroom. So cost containment became a real issue in the 1980s. Now we're talking about my time now. We're talking about the time when I was practicing that. Privileges. How were privileges being discerned? But more important than anything else has been this mushrooming of technology and the incorporation of medicine, corporatization of medicine. I can't get beyond this. I'm a writer. I write stories, I write poetry, okay? But G. Gale Stevens is the poet laureate of the modern family medicine movement. Okay? If you're not familiar with the Keystone conferences, you should be, okay? Because he was instrumental in creating these. He was from Southern Missouri, and then taught and helped start the program, the family medicine program in Kansas, and then went to Alabama. And he died about 10 years ago, and they're now continuing these Keystone conferences. If you get an opportunity to go to a Keystone conference, go to them because they look at all the really important issues. Okay. The 21st century has really, I love these people. Okay. Most of these people are quite a bit younger than I am. Some of them will recognize it in the teachers. Okay. I was interviewing Matthew Nix several years ago, and I think Matthew's out there. And I realized that Matthew, no matter how mature he looks and acts and does, he was 15 years younger than my youngest son. 15 days younger than my youngest son. So, and Drew Dawson up in Pocahontas, and Dennis Shelvington in Stuttgart, and Lee Camp up in Perryville, and Julie Gardner. Okay. You talk about a go-getter. Okay. This lady is a go-getter. She gets things done and things need to get done. I can't see it over here, but I want y'all to focus on this man's picture. His name is Steve Collier. He's from Augusta, Arkansas. That's where I'm from originally. He started R-Care. If it wasn't for Steve, R-Care would not exist. Okay? And they provide services for family medicine services for people who live in 27 underserved counties in the state of Arkansas, 10 underserved counties in southwest Kentucky, and 10 underserved counties in northwest Mississippi. Okay, this man needs rewards. Okay, so I would encourage you, if you have an opportunity and you ever see him on a speaking diet somewhere, go where, because he will teach you how to get things done. Okay. With the 20th century, the old issues didn't go away, but there were new issues. And as y'all know this, it's hard to attract somebody. It's hard to attract somebody to go to a community that's losing 10% of its population every decade. Okay. How do you get young physicians to go into communities where where the schools are not in there? Okay. Where you don't have services. Certainly don't have Starbucks. Okay? You don't have, there are lots of things you don't have. Well, you do it like Steve Collier's do, okay? You establish a town like Cotton Plant, which has no, it's just basically gone, okay? But they go in and set a clinic, you don't have to live there as a physician, but you are as a nurse practitioner. But you can go in there and provide services for those people. And that's what they're doing. That's how they're answering this question. Okay. I don't have a lot of time to go over these, but y'all know these probably better than I did. I stuck around the practice of medicine the next 3 years, so I can see what you know more. And I found it fascinating. I like computers, but I found them quite fascinating. By the way, two of our Arkansas, I'll show you a picture in a minute. Two of our Arkansas physicians were in the early stages of developing EMRs. Okay, and one of them died in a plane wreck, having a mental block on the other guy's name. Okay. Telemedicine. Y'all seen these studies? Telemedicine. There are lots of people, a lot of people in my age range who look at telemedicine and say, that's going to be an antibiotic vending machine and a pain medicine vending machine. Some interesting studies on it, okay? That and y'all may know this better than I do, that if you use telemedicine in a situation of an already established patient, that doesn't happen. If it's new patients, it's more likely to happen, okay? And mid-level providers, the patient-centered medical home, I don't think the patient-centered medical home has played out yet. I don't think we know where that's going to go in the long run. I think we know the things that are going on right now, but I don't think we know for sure what's going to happen with that. The Arkansas Academy of, this is my commercial, okay? Because I'm on the foundation of the Arkansas Academy of Family Physicians. You look at our membership over the last 75 years. This is our 75th anniversary, okay? And we've grown and we're going to keep growing, okay? And we want you as a young family doctor, as a resident, we want you to be a part of that and help us grow with it, okay? As a part of that, our foundation this year established a goal to raise $250,000 to endow two $5,000 scholarships for two family medicine residents who have matched with a family medicine residency in the state of Arkansas. Okay. We plan to have that done in 2 years. We started in August. We've collected $80,000 already. Okay. And we hope to have that done, so because we're not going to stop at $250,000. If we look like we're going to make more money, if we can get more money for this and get more scholarships for the students out there.